All right, so now we can go ahead and begin with our debate on the Department of Education. So let me first introduce our debaters and talk about our format. I actually took down the slide, but I'll talk about our format. So arguing the resolution is the U.S. should eliminate the Department of Education. Arguing the affirmative is Tate Parker. He's a political science major, a history major, and philosophy major. Lots of majors. He's in his third year and hopes to go to law school. And it's his third year on the Debate Society of the University of Washington. Is it IPDA? Mm-hmm. International Parliamentary Debate Association competitive debate team. Arguing the negative is Ada Liu, who's a third year majoring in biology. It's her third year in the Debate Society. And she wants to go on to medical school and become an oncologist. So let's first welcome our two debaters. The format is International Public Debate Association. So we will start off with an opening case by the affirmative. We'll speak for 5 minutes. Is that right? They'll keep their own time. Speak for 5 minutes. That's followed by a brief period of cross-examination to kind of help develop their case. For your purposes, don't flow the cross-examination. Just flow the speeches. So an opening case by the affirmative, cross-examination. An opening case by the negative, some cross-examination. And then the affirmative speaks, then the negative speaks, and then the affirmative has closing remarks. So we will go through that. At the end of that, we'll take a break. We'll dismiss and thank our debaters, and then we'll return afterwards to further discuss debate tactics and resolution. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to our opening affirmative.
Hi, everyone. This is a much bigger audience than I've ever had before, so thanks for watching. All right, now that my time has started, I'd like to thank everyone for being here, my judge, my audience. This will be a great debate. So today we are debating the resolution, the United States should eliminate the Department of Education. Just for some background info, the Department of Education was created in 1979 with the goal of improving student outcomes and quality. This is according to the Department of Education Organization Act in 1979. As of 45 years later, I'm the affirmative, so I'm going to be arguing to eliminate the department. The budget has ballooned for this department. The test scores are flat nationally, and student loans are creating a massive crisis. All of these things are tied to the existence of the Department of Education and contributed to its failure. A quick definition of the word eliminate, according to Oxford Languages, is to completely remove or get rid of. So we are abolishing the department, we're not shrinking it. The weighing mechanism will be net benefits to American students. It is the affirmative burden to prove that eliminating the DOE will lead to better educational outcomes to students in the United States, and it is the negative's burden to prove that it will lead to worse outcomes. A tie goes to the negative since the resolution states should rather than a neutral arbiter. So I have four contentions, it will be harms, plan, solvency, and benefit. So first let's go into harms. Subpoint A, achievement gaps. We look at racial achievement gaps, specifically according to the Hetchinger report in May of 2023. Racial gaps have been stagnant since the 1980s. Compliance focuses have not improved outcomes, and has led to complete unmet expectations around equity, and minority students have had unchanged outcomes. They're still just as bad as they were when the department was created. According to economic achievement gaps from Brookings in May of 2023, income gaps have also been constant. Title I funds have been lost to bureaucratic stagnancy. Poverty and inequality has remained entrenched, and resources have been misdirected. Subpoint B, regional disparities. In urban areas, according to the NCES in 2022, urban schools are forced to compete under identical standards despite having different needs. Some areas are poor in urban areas, some areas are richer, and they have the funding priorities are not equally distributed to each of those districts. Local conditions are often ignored, and this leads to poor innovation and underserving of students. If you look at rural areas, according to Education Week in April 2023, remote learning is restricted by federal seat time. This means that you can't have an AP science teacher teach remote in 6 different school districts in Montana, which would be basically the only affordable option for these places. Instead, you have to just cancel the classes and not offer these services because the Department of Education mandates that you have physical seat time within a classroom. And if we look at national performance, according to subpoint C, the PISA score, or Program for International Student Assessment, according to the OECD, has been middling and decreasing compared to other developed nations since the department was created. Math is very far below average, and national competitiveness is flat despite funding increasing in real dollars by over 73% over the last 40 years. So now let's take a look at my plan. Subpoint A, mandate. We're going to basically eliminate this department over the course of 6 years. I have fiat since I'm the affirmative, so what we're arguing is that that this should happen, not whether it can. Subpoint B, funding. The DOE has a current budget of about $79.6 billion in discretionary funding, total of $140 billion. We look at all loans that it gives out. Basically, what we're going to be doing is transferring the student loan program over to state block grants in the Treasury Department. All of the Department of Justice's education lawsuits will move over, all of the Department of Education's legal team will move over to the Department of Justice to prosecute any offenses over civil rights or ignorance of equity goals for the federal government. This will save about $5 to $7 billion in annual expenses by eliminating bureaucracy for the department. Now let's look at specifically the solvency of the plan. If we look at back to harm 1, according to the OECD, decentralized education systems with a 10% rise in local control leads to 5 to 6 points higher on the PISA score, that exam that I mentioned earlier. Better economic outcomes. Decentralization delivers 15% more funds to classrooms because states are forced to have more levies, the same with local government. Fewer layers of bureaucracy also leads to faster outcomes. If we look back at regional disparities, it will lead to 8 to 10% math gains in 3 years in urban areas. That's according to Brookings in 2022. If we look at rural areas, online teachers have a 27% increase in AP participation and higher science access, according to Education Week in 2023. And it will lead to increases in the overall PISA score by 20 to 25 points. If we look at Germany, Switzerland, which have experimented with this idea. Those are my 3 main contentions, and I'll pass it off to the negative.
Ready? Now standing for my 2 minutes of cross. Can you just clarify again what the score you were talking about with in your achievement gap
Yes.
and insolvency?
Program for International Student Assessment.
Okay. What does this test assess?
Basically, it's mostly a universal math and English proficiency standardization. They test it K through 12.
So it's a standardized test from K to 12?
Yes.
Is it administered by the Department of Education?
No.
Do you know who it's administered by?
It's administered by a private nonprofit organization. It's administered by the OECD. That's who oversees it.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned in your solvency that giving states this greater control has these benefits. How exactly what does it mean to increase local involvement or control? Is it a funding thing or? Yes,
so it's both funding and regulatory control. Mm-hmm. Right now, most state budgets for education have about 8 to 10% of federal funding. So what we're really not talking about federal funding, we're talking about standards for the most part. And right now, standards have...
You're telling me that national standards are the primary controller, and so just removing those standards will create a difference?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in your point 1B, so on the regional differences, is the test score balances, is it specifically on, for example, the No Child Left Behind series of standardized testing?
This has been prior to that. I'm not sure exactly what came before No Child Left Behind. I know that a 2015 bill called the Every Student Succeeds Act succeeded that in 2015, and scores still have declined, especially after COVID, so that was not a great solution.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned the problem of bureaucracy. Will the changing of the departments not inherently create more deep bureaucracy?
No, it won't, because it's eliminating an entire federal department.
So you're saying that the process won't inherently also be complicated and, there's a lot of difficulties?
I don't think that means a permanent increase in bureaucracy. I think it means a permanent decrease in it.
Okay, thank you. As this is my first speech of the round, I would like to begin by thanking my opponent as well as everyone watching us today. Today, I stand in firm negation of the resolution. The United States federal government should eliminate the Department of Education. I agree with the framework, but I would like to highlight a burden of the affirmation that it is necessary to prove that it is better to eliminate the department itself than to do the amount of budget cuts that our opponent proposes. So essentially, my opponent has to prove the problems of the Department of Education are due to it being a department, and not specifically how it's currently run or funded. So with that said, I'm going to go into my own contentions first before attacking my opponents. My first contention is still important. My subpoint A is the K-12 wealth gap. The Economic Policy Institute in 2025 reports that the DOE is successful in allocating funds to the neighborhoods that need it most, giving 51% of funding to the poorest third of schools versus 18% to the richest third. The Peter G. Peterson Foundation in 2023 extends this, that currently we see this funding inequality be in large part mitigated by federal, that in fact 43% of school funding that comes from state funding actually increases inequality because it's based on local property tax, which means we're seeing an increase of these regional challenges. It's the region's neighborhood's property tax, meaning that federal funding is actually helping to mitigate these problems. Subpoint 2, special education. The Century Foundation highlights in 2025 that 15% of students nationwide enjoy the benefits accrued by the DOE on these special education, which would have to be entirely overhauled in order to move it into a different department. Subpoint C is on higher education. The National Center for Education Statistics says in 2025 that 40% of undergrads take out these loans in order to fund their education. My opponent has not created a way in order to do this better just by moving it into another department. Brings me to contention 2 of reform. Subpoint 1 is standardized testing. The fact is, there are many problems, but we can see that standardized testing provides the ways to move forward. You can see that NPR in 2015 highlights that the failure of the No Child Left Behind Act, which is to enforce standardized testing on schools and assess their quality based off of that, was not considered unsuccessful because of the standardized testing, but rather because of its enforcement policies. And we can see that this was ultimately successful in creating a large amount of data on these students' educational attainment. Now, ultimately, when we look at it, the efficiency was on the application and not on the existence of standardized testing. Which brings me to my subpoint B of research. The best chance we have of reforming educational policy is keeping it within the department. They have the most data and they have the most joint employees set on this particular issue. For example, Global Public Policy and Governments in 2021 highlights that interagency cooperation, which means between different departments, significantly increases bureaucracy and due to both unfamiliarity to the subject and just inherent departmental challenges. While we can see keeping it internal to the Department of Education gives us the actual greatest chances to solve these problems my opponent brings up. They hold the data and they're able to use the data to then enforce and improve their own policies. Bringing me to contention 3 of precedent. Subpoint A is why departments? When we see a department is being ineffective, choosing to cut the Department of Education and removing it entirely sets a poor precedent for the fact that the solution is to remove the problem from sight instead of just being able to reform and focus on it more. Brookings in 2024 highlights that cutting departments is largely irresponsible due to the fact that departments are massive, complicated structures, and just cutting them creates bureaucracy. And the Century Foundation again highlights that, especially for special ed students, just moving the program to a different department would actively harm students due to the fact we're taking them away from these long-established structures. And my subpoint B is on federal power. The fact is, states are not actually good at managing their education. They're just better at making it seem like they are. The National Center for Education Statistics in 2019 highlights again that state standards often don't come up to national levels. State tests, for example, that are administered give students proficiency on reading and math. When they were retested with national standards, they only achieve basic proficiency. So even if these states report better scores, well, they're incentivized to do so. We see that federal scores give stronger accountability. Moving into my opponent's point, on the first contention of harms and subpoint A, achievement gaps. Just because we've currently not seen this be successful doesn't mean that the problem is because it's the department. My opponent has just proposed moving these programs elsewhere. He has not proposed a way for us to actually solve this problem. Similarly, on regional differences, we can see from contention 1 subpoint A that it is actually these regional differences that is causing much of this harm. That the local and regional neighborhood property tax base actually causes greater harm, and that we still need this federal funding. And into the plan is simply not well fleshed out. He's moving these programs, but as we can see, his $5 to $7 billion decrease, first of all, is just a small sliver of the budget, and second of all, it's only on bureaucracy that we can actually see will increase if we move the program. And on the contention 3 of solvency, my opponent's main point centers on giving power back to the states. But according to the Sonoma County Office of Education, states currently set their own educational standards. They fully do. There are no federal regulations on student achievement or curriculum. Thank you.
My opponent ready?
I'm ready.
3, 2. So you said that that the department has a lot of data. That this is very important, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So is that its signature achievement, collecting data?
Can you emphasize? What do you mean?
It seemed like specifically in your contention 2 of reform and how important like having this data and this research was. What does this have to do with their actual educational attainment?
So I'm saying the ability to improve the policies you're currently criticizing lies in analyzing the data and having the department, reform itself. That by giving it to different departments, we distract from the reform issue.
Has that data been used to improve a single policy or outcome?
I believe that in neither world we can currently assess whether this will come out. In that, if we fiat the ability for you to remove the department, then we can also fiat the potential for the department to improve. Otherwise, yours just splitting the department also will not create this reform.
Okay, but doesn't that data show that student outcomes have flatlined or decreased nationally?
Perhaps, but there's layers to this. First of all, the fact that currently educational attainment is not up does not prove that the department is unable to reform. And second of all, it is better to have this data, even if the data is not currently positive, to have this reform. We're not saying that the Department of Education is currently succeeding at using the data, but that removing the data from the Department of Education will worsen the issue.
Okay. Did the affirmative plan suggest eliminating data collection on students' outcomes within the federal government?
The fundamental point isn't on the data collection itself. It's on keeping the department that manages its data within the policies. Like, they create both the policy and they manage the data. Putting them in separate departments just increases bureaucracy.
Okay, and you said that interagency cooperation increases bureaucracy, so wouldn't it be better to have less agencies?
So this is so the education programs you are splitting are still going to need to cooperate with each other. So it's as much as is reasonable. The goal isn't to just eliminate all departments.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, gotta move.
All right, given that I only have 3 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and quickly address all of my opponent's points before reiterating my own. So just going down the flow here, they pointed out that it's necessary to prove that eliminating the department is good. I agree with that burden. That's fine to me. According to contention 1, they said that it's still important, that K through 12 funding is, it still matters, that just 8 to 10% of the state budgets goes to these poor communities. They didn't specifically state what percentage of that leads to improved outcomes. If this funding is going to these school districts and it has absolutely no improvement in outcomes, how can you say that it's well used? Most of my opponent's case relies on just data or money keeping going to the same places. They can't prove to me in any sense of the word that outcomes have improved for students in the United States. Not a single data point suggests on their side of the argument that this has happened. If we look at their subpoint B for contention 1, they talk about federal education and how most of this federal funding comes from the Department of Education. I am not suggesting in any way whatsoever eliminating funding for the special education department. Instead, it should be folded into the Department of Health and Human Services that already exists. We don't need the education department to manage special education funding. That exists, it can go somewhere else. And it will reduce that bureaucracy that my opponent mentioned when there's too much interagency cooperation. If we had less agencies with more oversight over more things, it would have less bureaucracy overall. Now, if we look at their second contention of reform in their first subpoint, how standardized testing and the failure of No Child Left Behind, the enforcement policies were what was bad, not the actual testing. Does that matter if the outcome is bad? So what enforcement policy, what enforcement change would need to occur in order to make these standardized tests better? There was no suggestion from my opponent of how that would work, of how these improvements would happen. They've only continued to get worse, and is only further a turn to my side of why the education department should be eliminated. Now, if we look at their subpoint B of research, they point out how all this data is important, again, this interagency cooperation thing. Again, this doesn't serve at all students. I can have as much data as I want. If it shows things are declining and getting worse, what does that do for me? I don't think that the federal government will stop collecting data on education just because you eliminate the DOE. It will be folded into the Office of the Treasury. Now, if we look at their third contention of precedent, they talk about how states aren't good at managing education and that federal testing shows that it's poor. Again, they didn't really state what the difference was. There's no numbers here. So is it 0.5% that states overestimate the federal education standards on? I don't know what that is. Now if I reiterate my own points again, look at subpoint A of harms. The achievement gaps are still bad. Regional disparities are still poor. The national performance on the PISA test still has failed. The plan adequately covers all of what's necessary to eliminate the DOE and proves that it should be eliminated overall. Thank you.
As in my last speech, I'd like to once again thank my opponent and everyone who's coming to watch us today. I continue to stand in firm negation of the resolution. The United States federal government should eliminate the Department of Education. I'm going to look at my own case first, then my opponent's, and then get into some voters to summarize what has gotten to be a slightly messy argument. So on my own contentions, first contentions on still important. My opponent's greatest attack is that currently we're seeing this funding isn't creating better progress. This I can agree with. However, my fundamental point here isn't that this funding is currently improving student achievement, but that removing this funding would in fact worsen student achievement. This is the core point. And that my opponent's plan of moving the funds to the states worsens. So I'm not saying that the Department of Education is currently successful, but I'm saying that cutting these programs would actively hurt them. And on my second contention of reform, I think this has gotten a bit confusing. The point is not that the Department of Education is the only way we can collect data on education. It's rather the fact that we're putting the internal resources of the department who manages their own policies into the research, giving it to a different foundation who would inevitably have to have that interagency bureaucracy doesn't improve the problem. But more crucially, the point I was bringing up with No Child Left Behind is that yes, we are not seeing achievement improve. I'm not disagreeing with my opponent's statistics here, but the important point is why. The reasons the Department of Education has currently been unsuccessful is that in the past, they've had bad policies. But that doesn't mean we cannot reform and improve their policies to make the Department of Education overall better. The main point is that the research is showing that overall, federal oversight is beneficial for student attainment. We've been managing it wrong thus far, but that also means if we are able to manage it right, we can see real concrete change. And on the contention of precedence, the opponents on this is nitpicking my statistic. The fact is, these were on average. On average, student achievements were marked as proficient when they would have, on average, been marked as basic. This is a massive difference, and this is also why we need to scrutinize my opponent's statistics about giving power back to the states, because states are incentivized to say that they've been doing a good job. Back on my opponent's point about the achievement gaps. Yes, again, as we can cross-apply my contention to subpoint A, the fact that current policies haven't worked doesn't mean that future policies cannot work. And again, if we apply my contention 1, the fact that this funding is at least keeping these schools afloat. On the regional point, my opponent has not responded to my point that a lot of the regional disparities are actually caused by giving power back to the states. Then on my opponent's contentions of solvency, it basically just centers on the idea that we can somehow give money back to the states or cut the programs. But when we ultimately come to look at the plan, there's no distinct way my opponent is able to both decrease funding and increase efficiency and give power to the state. My opponent cannot simply just say there's a grab bag of things to improve. And that brings me to today's voters. The first is on no AF solvency. My opponent is giving a lot of reasons the Department of Education is currently bad, but very few concrete ways to change it. Let's move back to the AF burden that the AF has agreed to. They need to prove the problems with the Department of Education are because it's a department and not with individual programs. Just moving them to the Department of Human Services or to the Treasury doesn't solve these problems. Either we are funding them less, in which we are not providing students the resources they need, or we are funding them the exact same, in which points, why are we increasing bureaucracy by breaking apart an entire department? There's simply no concrete way to solve this. My opponent's plan either breaks apart the same programs or just doesn't make a difference in the budget. And that brings me to the second voter of reform is possible. The greatest chance we have of improving education attainment is keeping our focus on resolving the Department of Education. I've proved this time and time again. Whether it's with the fact that the current programs it holds are currently beneficial and arguably might need more funding, or if we can see that states have proven themselves to be unable to manage themselves, we can see that arguably stronger federal oversight and a stronger Department of Education has just as great or even greater of a chance of succeeding, while my opponent is largely just waving away the issues they currently have with if we follow the current trend. But that's why we're moving past the current trend. And my opponent also hasn't concretely answered why moving, for example, data research into another department would improve in any way, when I've already proven that cooperation across agencies, all on education. The point isn't that we should eliminate all departments, it's that if they already have to collaborate on education, why not keep them together and to improve this internal cohesion? Thank you.
As this is my last speech, I'd like to again thank my audience, many judges, for being here, and especially my opponent. This has been a very interesting and thorough debate. I would like to go ahead and go straight into the voting issues. So first things first, just throw money at it. That seems to be the DOE's policy, what my opponent advocates for, and the reason why we should not eliminate the department. Why are we throwing money at problems? Again, I've actually brought up numbers. If we look again at my point earlier, from subpoint A, racial and economic gaps have been stagnant. They have not closed. They have poverty and inequality has been entrenched. The DOE is a major factor in this because it has absolutely no recourse for not standardizing and allowing local control for it to meet the needs of students in their districts. As I pointed out earlier, in rural districts, you have to have mandatory student seated time rather than allowing online classes, which is, again, the only way that you can fund having certain, specialized science teachers or AP classes. You're not going to have a full AP staff on site at a school in rural Wyoming with 200 people. The only way to access that is through online services, which, again, the DOE is too stagnant and too bureaucratic to actually adapt to. Only a state that is rural, like Wyoming, would be able to meet that need on a quick and efficient basis. So if we look at that specifically, as well as the solvency of the plan itself. Now, one of the major points of my opponent's argument is that eliminating the DOE basically will not have any improvements. And I have pointed out specifically how this has increased positive outcomes in urban areas. I pointed out the 8 to 10% math gains in 3 years from Brookings earlier, according to my solvency subpoint B. How AP participation and science access improved in rural areas, also according to that subpoint B and Education Week source. The PISA score improved average of 20 to 25 points. That's a massive gain with local control. Now, this whole idea of these property tax levies only going to wealthy areas is mostly false, because the average state budget is made up of over 50% state funding, not local property tax funding when it comes to schooling. So most of that money is going to be coming from the state itself, which is distributed across the state, not just the communities in which you're voting on property tax levies or anything like that. So it will still adequately serve the needs of students. It will improve test outcomes, and overall, it will meet the burden of net improvement for outcomes for American students. Eliminating the Department of Education is necessary and essential for the functional improvement of our student futures in this country. Thank you.